Hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of A Rebel Without Applause, coming to you as I always do from my little, here you see it, my nutshell of infinite space, right here in the Wood of the Holly under the sign. And with me today is a guest I am just extremely excited to have on the other side of this digital divide. He is an accomplished novelist and biographer. His writing tells us much about the times that these incredible people lived in, as well as who they are. And those people include the profiles, Arthur Miller, Larry David, Jerry Lewis, tennis icon John McEnroe, the songwriting giant Irving Berlin, and 2 volumes on the chairman of the board. By that, I mean Frank Sinatra. But lastly, and now I would say most importantly, comes a new book from James Kaplan. It's called 3 Shades of Blue and the Lost Empire of Cool. And he's here with me to talk all about that and more. Welcome, James Kaplan.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, I'll tell you, it was terrific just to read the book. And 3 Shades of Blue, the 3 shades, just to help folks, Miles Davis, Trane, and Bill Evans come together in 1959 to create this iconic album, a cultural touchstone called Kind of Blue. And you've really done something that I think is incredibly difficult to do with jazz, because jazz, to me, at its core, defies language. It lives in another realm, the realm of emotion and associations. But yet, with your tools, beginning with the alphabet, you've managed to bring this to life in a way that's at once accessible to those that aren't drenched in this stuff, and to shed life out of the times they come in. So firstly, congratulations.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. It was a work of love. I love the music, and I wanted to give it its due. I wanted to do right by it. And as I say in the book, it all started out with Miles. I was incredibly lucky in 1989 to have Vanity Fair assign me to interview Miles Davis when I was a young pup of a writer, and I knew zilch about jazz, and I mean zilch. I went in to meet Miles Davis for the first time. I talk about this in the book. With my shaking in my shoes, my heart knocking, because this is a guy not only all the cliches, a legend, an icon, but legendary for his meanness. Right? Everybody always talked about the Dark Prince, Miles, and he didn't like white people, and he turned his back on audiences, and he was a killer. He was tough. And I walk into his suite in the Essex House on Central Park South, and he's a pussycat. He was so kind to me, and so respectful and gentle and tolerant of my ignorance, and sort of tried his best to answer my dumb questions. And it turned into for me a really good interview and an important part of my life, because when I was talking with my editor many years later about what book to do next, I talked about my interview with Miles Davis, and he talked about his passion for Kind of Blue. And then I had this idea: what about these 3 guys? Now, there are 3 other guys who were very important. There was Jimmy Cobb on the drums, and there was Cannonball Adderley, and there was Paul Chambers on the bass. Those were brilliant musicians. But the 3 geniuses of that album were Miles and Trane and Evans. And I said, how about a book about those guys as men and musicians before, during, and after the making of Kind of Blue? And my editor said, go do it. So my chance encounter with Miles Davis, my lucky strike, turned out to set the stage for this whole story I told.
I had a Miles Davis story years ago. Somebody called me because as a stand-up comedian, they said, Miles is playing at the Palace down on Vine Street. He's going to be late, and we need someone to kill time before as a comedian. So I said, sure. You mean I will open for Miles Davis? And I did. And then, it was at the very latter stages where he played with his back to the audience, turned around and went, beep, 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 and then flipped around and
Hit the
people,
keyboard.
yeah, and it was like each note was a gift coming from the gods,
Yeah.
at that stage. I wish I could be more clear about the date and time, but it was a very electric concert.
Well, it had to have been in the 80s, right? He died in 91. I'm guessing maybe the mid 80s.
Yeah, probably mid to late 80s,
Yeah.
sometime after that for sure. I have a quick question for you because I feel like it's the lost empire of cool, which is
Yes.
a kind of an interesting
That's
term. When I think of empires, I think of Roman empires and other empires that have disintegrated. But this is the empire of cool. So in some way, maybe you're a little bit of an archaeologist here to resurrect this lost empire.
Well, I'm talking about a number of things, but mainly I'm talking about a time in America when every small to medium-sized city in America had a newspaper,
Mm-hmm.
and every newspaper in America had a music column, popular music column, classical music column. And anybody in America who listened to music in the 1950s and very early 60s knew who Ella Fitzgerald was, knew who Duke Ellington was, knew who Count Basie was. They knew who Miles Davis was. And jazz was important in America. It loomed large in America. And there was this quantity called cool, which has about 17 different definitions, some of which contradict each other, and not all of which I'm a fan of. But there was something deeply important about jazz in that time. And then, as we said, it all went away virtually overnight in 1964, February of 1964. And a lot of people to this day hate the Beatles for having done that to jazz. I cannot hate the Beatles because I love the Beatles as much as I love jazz, but I think it's just greatness in a different form. And I think there's certainly for a room under the tent for every kind of music, including that all great music, including jazz and rock and roll.
Well,
Uh, was it right that Miles had to open for Steve Miller? No, that was not right. Uh, that's what happened.
yeah, it's showbiz. Well, one of the things that's, the jazz, as you described, goes through various permutations. Miles is kind of riding along on that continuum, starting with uh, Billy Eckstein, who I went to high school with his son, Guy. And the sort of the end of this big band era, and then you get into these small combos. World of after World War II and the bebop with Dizzy and Parker, and then moving across the decades into more of a hard bop, and then into this modal world that I think this album opens the door to. But what seems to be happening to me across this continuum is that jazz is morphing from a dance experience to a listening experience,
Yep.
and it's becoming more exclusive, and you either get it or you don't, and if you're
Yep.
not hip enough, get the fuck out of here.
Yep.
And it sort of, I think, sets the stage for the tsunami that you just described.
Well, yeah, in a way, there's a brilliant guy, a brilliant young trumpet. I guess he's not that young anymore, but a brilliant young musician named Nicholas Payton.
Yeah.
Nicholas Payton, in 2011, wrote this online broadside called "On Why Jazz Isn't Cool Anymore." And it's a series of statements about that subject, about why jazz isn't cool anymore. One of the statements is jazz stopped being cool in 1959. So 1959, this amazing year for jazz, not only Kind of Blue, the greatest and best-selling jazz album of all time, but Mingus and Time Out, Dave Brubeck, and Ornette Coleman, The Shape of Jazz to Come. But it is also, as Nicholas Payton said, it is the point when jazz separates itself from popular music. That actually happened well before 1959. It arguably happened with bebop. At the moment when the swing era ends in 1945, like somebody slammed on the brakes, and suddenly they're Diz and Bird, right, with bebop, this music that that is for the elite, right? It's for the initiate. It is for those who can understand it. It's for the hip only. And suddenly you're not going to dance to Relaxing at Camarillo. You know,
No.
you're gonna stand there and tap your foot. So Nicholas Payton was right. Jazz separated itself from popular music. That was a big mistake. And Ornette Coleman. So 1959 is not only the moment for modal jazz, Miles's impatience with too many chords in jazz, right? And he decides to simplify, simplify, simplify. But then there's Ornette Coleman taking jazz out in another direction entirely into free jazz. And they're not only going to be they're going to still be chords, but it's going to be whatever Ornette Coleman decides at the moment, and the music is just going to go the way it goes. And a lot of people stop listening to that because a lot of people want to hear songs. They want to hear songs they can recognize, songs that they're moved by. And there are many people who are moved by free jazz, but there are many, 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 many more people who weren't moved by it. And jazz, at the same time that rock and roll was killing jazz, jazz was busy shooting itself in the foot, both feet.
One album I'd like to add to that, I don't know where it ranks on the selling charts, but is Something Else.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit of a, because you got Cannonball and Miles and Hank Jones and I don't know if it's got to be after.
I should have that on the tip of my tongue, but I don't. It's around the same time, slightly before, slightly after.
Right. It's more satisfying melodically, I think, than the all blues or Kind of Blue. I think for like one of the things that I feel as a guy who plays clarinet is that music doesn't impose the same kind of rigorous restrictions on you melodically as like the hard bop guys a few years before, and the very dense chord changes, and you've got to keep up, and you really, at least for me, you really have to study this, play these things at very slow tempos before you can kind of get them in your fingers and your ears. But to me, they're just insanely beautiful.
Yeah.
One of the things I noticed today is a lot of people will call Parker tunes. Let's play Billy's Bounce, or let's play Confirmation, or one of these tunes. And they generally play them way faster than Parker played it. It was like, wait, down, bro.
Yeah. Yeah. Slow it down. Exactly.
Because it's really pretty too. There was no sacrifice of beauty, I think. Having listened to this record, again, revisiting it recently in anticipation of talking to you, like the thing that really hits me about the music is the feeling of loneliness,
yes,
alienation, being isolated, and urban isolation. And there's echoes of that in the theater, at the same time, and just this intense kind of melancholy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, you can say that you can tie that to any of these three guys. They all were guys with very, very difficult lives and difficult emotional undertow. Each of them. Miles was he was a heroin addict from 1949 to 1954. He was a very small man who was always uncertain about his physicality, and I also think about his sexuality. Coltrane was a guy who had suffered a deep loss, the loss of his father at an early age, and other people important to him, and was also an addict. And then Bill Evans, who came from a very dark and depressive family. And when this miracle happened and Miles asks Evans to join his band, Miles quickly sets about becoming the biggest addict in Miles's band, and stayed an addict for the rest of his life for all kinds of reasons. So you have the melancholy of each of these geniuses, and then going back to the guy who created the album and the leader, Miles. You find in the tone of Miles's trumpet this this amazing combination of warmth and distance. It's there in every note that Miles plays on everything that he plays. And that it's inimitable. It comes from deep inside. It speaks to the loneliness and alienation you're talking about. Um, and it is deep in the bones of this album, this great album, Kind of Blue.
Yes, of course, the drugs and heroin. I mean, I guess to some extent, I've written about this myself in my script. I think there was this false belief that if you took a taste of that, it could help you to higher creative accomplishments.
If you want to play like Bird, you got to do like Bird.
You got to do like Bird. In my script, he ends up, the main character who is white ends up at the state hospital in Camarillo. And who's there? He'd been trying to find him in clubs. He can't. He's always gone late. He missed. But he ends up, because of circumstances, in Camarillo. And Charlie says, don't do what I do. I put those words in his mouth.
Oh, he said that to a lot of people. He said that to a lot of people. He said, as long as you snort heroin, you are a gentleman. He said, the minute you put it in your veins, it owns you. It takes possession, and you're you might as well be wearing pants with no seat, right? Your bare ass is shown to the world because you become the slave of the drug.
Yeah, and it destroys talent. It doesn't enable it, in my view.
Yeah.
That's, you're talking about a whole generation of players that really just, were destroyed by this. And who's standing today? Well,
Sonny
Rollins is the last man standing.
He not only had the great good fortune of good genes, Sonny, but he took himself to the federal correctional facility in Lexington, Kentucky, and he turned himself in, and he kicked there, and he never used again.
Hello, friends, countrymen, and subscribers. After a number of years doing this podcast, I finally have a promotional partner, and the company is called Cozy Earth, and they make all manner of bamboo bedding for your sleepy time needs. That includes pillowcases, duvets, sheets, and even pajamas. And I'm able to offer you a 21% discount on any and all purchases from Cozy Earth. All you have to do is type in the promo code Rebel to get that 21% discount. Now, I've been using these bamboo sheets from Cozy Earth for a couple of years now, and I can stand behind it because I sleep on it. So all you got to do is, like I said, type in the promo code Rebel, go to the Cozy Earth website indicated below, and you can get a 21% discount and support sound sleep while you support me. Dig it, Daddy-O. I have my own thoughts and I want to hear yours. I'll share mine. But what was their message to the world? These largely, yes, they were celebrities of a certain sort, but they were also largely just marginalized and ignored. And there was a racial message to this music too.
There was a racial message to the music. And when I talked to Sonny Rollins for the book, he said an astounding thing. He sent something out of left field. I never saw it coming because I was talking to him about drugs. And he said that to Black musicians, there was a positive element about heroin. He said that it was our form of rebellion against white society. Absolute racial element to this whole story. These guys, I don't know what percentage of the great jazz musicians were Black, but say 85, 90, something like that, of the great ones. They were nobility. They were nobility. They were kings and princes, these guys, almost all of them guys, almost all of them men. And Art Blakey is driving through the South. He is with a couple of musicians on his way to a gig. He's pulled over for driving while Black, and Georgia State Patrolman breaks his skull for driving while Black. Probably said a word he shouldn't have said to the state trooper, right? And Miles Davis standing in front of Birdland on Broadway in New York City in August of 1959, the month that kind of blew drops. Miles Davis is standing in front of Birdland, standing in front of a poster that says in giant letters, Miles Davis, with a big picture of Miles Davis. Miles is out there smoking a cigarette and talking to chatting up a woman. I'm not going to talk about the guy's, the cop, the cop's ethnic background, but a dumb cop walks up, orders Miles Davis to move along, right? Miles is smoking a cigarette, talking to a woman outside Birdland, where he's the star, and Miles refuses. Miles tries to explain to him that he's playing inside. Explanation not wanted. The cop proceeds to beat the shit out of Miles Davis with his baton. Miles is wearing a light colored summer suit, always immaculately attired, and it is very soon covered with blood. And this was the kind of thing that could still happen in the America of 1959 and well above the Mason-Dixon line, in New York City, for God's sake. So yes, there's a racial component to it. This music was, and the drugs were, their form of rebellion in a lot of ways. It was great art. They were the inventors, the practitioners of this great art, and they got nominal respect, right, in all these music columns and all the newspapers in the small and medium-sized cities across the United States, but not when they were on the street and not when they were driving down the highway. And so, yeah, and jazz had a lot to do with that. So, if I'm talking to Sonny Rollins and I mention rock and roll and he talks about how if he talks about disdaining rock and roll and hating rock and roll,
Mm-hmm.
I have to cut him some slack because that's what happened. This music came along that has its own form of majesty, and we can make all kinds of apples and oranges comparisons between rock and roll and jazz. And by the way, speaking of great podcasts, yours, I want to mention another great podcast. There's a man named Andrew Hickey out of Manchester, England. Andrew Hickey does a podcast called The History of Rock Music in 500 Songs. And anybody who listens to Bill Kalmanson ought to also check out Andrew Hickey. It's an amazing podcast.
Oh, good.
Back to jazz. I mean, it was a black invention. White geniuses came in early on, here and there, but it was black music, and it was created by black geniuses, and it was created and expounded and continued until, as you said, the tsunami hit.
The lesson that I get from it after World War II, of course, it precedes my own life. When I listen to that very complicated music, I feel this message is like for these artists, like, you don't fucking know me. You don't know what's in me. You don't know who I am. And the famous story of throwing the cymbal at the jam session. If you can't hang, get the fuck out of here. And I feel that message in the music from these great black geniuses coming out of World War II, especially, the bebop into the hard bop. It's like there's this almost psychic violence behind it. Like, you just don't fucking know me.
Yep.
And and if you can't hang, get out, as a musician and as a listener, you got to meet the music halfway. Just like if you want to really appreciate a good Shakespeare play, read the play, study it. It's going to reward you more. I feel like jazz makes the same demand on the listeners. But rock and roll does not make that demand on you.
Rock and roll gives you pure emotion. It gives you the hit right to the vein, right? It is the needle going right into the vein.
Yeah.
It is great rock and roll is instant ecstasy. And you have with jazz, you can get ecstasy, but you got to do the work too.
Right. And you've done the work as a writer, and clearly as a listener. I mean, I'm of an age where I didn't really know anything about jazz or have any emotional connection to it until a friend of mine in college gave me these cassettes of Charlie Parker. I
Mm,
didn't even play, and it was like, wow. You know,
yeah.
the most sophisticated music in rock and roll was like Jimi Hendrix to me, which, you know, was fantastic in its own way. He is, you know, I think on another level also. But and then that opened this door, and it's like, whoa, what did I miss? You know, like this white kid, what did I miss?
Listen, you missed it for a while, but then you caught it.
Yeah, and one of the things that was really interesting about in your book is the piano player in Kind of Blue.
Yeah,
Um,
the fastest boogie woogie piano in central New Jersey.
right, a white guy. His father had a golf course or a driving range. You know, he looked very preppy, like this. What are you doing with this Ofe Peckerwood motherfucker in your band? But I felt like one of the things that's really great about Miles is that talent seeks talent.
Yep.
It defies race. I think about what Larry Bird must have meant to Magic Johnson. They
Hmm.
needed each other.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like Miles was on that level too in finding this unlikely collaborator.
Yeah, I know. And Miles, for all the people said he hated white people, and for Miles saying that his hobby was making fun of white people on TV, which I love. Uh, Miles was truly colorblind when it came to the musicians he hired. He did not give a shit whether you were purple, green, white, black, brown, or red. He didn't care. If you could play, you could play. If you couldn't play, get the hell out. And there's a famous story about the great saxophonist George Coleman, who was playing with Miles, and they were out in Detroit playing an engagement. And the afternoon before they go on stage, Miles is walking down the hotel hall, and he passed George Coleman's hotel room, and he hears Coleman practicing his saxophone in his room. And Miles bangs on the door. Coleman opens it up, and Miles says, "I pay you to practice on the bandstand, not in your room." Miles wanted spontaneity. He wanted freshness. He didn't want anything canned. I don't know how he felt about Coltrane, because Coltrane practiced 23 hours out of every day of his short life. But uh,
This, yeah, that's interesting. Interesting parallels to other art forms too, because when Marlon Brando comes on the scene, you feel that he's experiencing these stories in front of the lens for the first time.
yeah,
You know, whether it's Streetcar, which is a revolution really in acting and in the theater, and maybe there's a connection there within the music as well. My feeling is great spontaneity comes with great preparation.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and Coleman should have just waited till Miles wasn't around before. Then he could pretend to make some mistakes on the bandstand. Uh, and Miles, of course, was a great one for making mistakes on the bandstand and in the recording studio, right? Miles had to make every standard that he played his own. And how did he make it his own? He'd fluff a note. And even in Round Midnight, Monk got furious at Miles. Monk would kept on saying to Miles about Round Midnight, "You ain't playing it right." And Miles wasn't. Miles had to pee on the hydrant, right?
Miles, as you describe it, had a ton of insecurity when he arrives in New York from St. Louis with limited experience in the face of Dizzy and this rapid fire kind of music. I
he
don't
was
know if he was confident he could hang.
he was and he wasn't. He knew he was a genius, but he was also, yeah, was he terrified? Yeah, he was terrified. He was 19 years old. He drops out of Juilliard. He starts playing. Dizzy and Bird have a feud, right? It's not really a feud. Dizzy got furious at Bird for being such a heroin addict and being such an insane heroin addict that He was always borrowing people's instruments and and then hawking them, like that. So they split up, and suddenly Miles is taking Dizzy Gillespie's place alongside Bird, the greatest saxophone of all time. And Miles knew that Miles Davis, was no Dizzy Gillespie. He couldn't play that fast. He couldn't play that high. But it was the genius of Bird that knew that Miles's playing could be a great complement to his playing, and pretty soon Miles was making an album where he was the leader, and he got Bird to play tenor on his album because it would go well with Miles's playing. So Miles, yes, he was terrified. Yes, he had his insecurities, but he had a towering ego, and deservedly so.
And then there's Coltrane, who's off in a different direction as he departs this album after, and he's on his own, I guess, some sort of spiritual journey, which is massively influential, but also I think kind of shedding audience members as he begins his this next stage of exploration.
I interviewed a terrific jazz pianist named Denny Zeitlin, and a West Coast guy. Denny Zeitlin talks about going to a club and hearing Coltrane in, I think it was 63. Coltrane is up there on the stand and engaging in some of his wilder explorations. And Denny Zeitlin told me that in a very short time, he began to feel as though Coltrane was practicing on the bandstand. He got annoyed. Denny Zeitlin did. He got annoyed at Coltrane. I'm here to hear you play, not to hear you practice. And even McCoy Tyner began to feel that Coltrane was playing for himself and not for musicians who were accompanying him. A lot of people felt that Coltrane knew he wouldn't have a long time here, and he had to explore every chord in every key of every song that he played, every single key.
Giant steps. I feel like, at 16 bars, but the chord changes and the journey it takes, it's like an Einstein equation. It's like high-end physics to navigate it and to understand it.
I would also argue that it's very beautiful. And I would also argue, I'm positive there are people out there who are not jazz aficionados, who don't know the music very well, who could hear Giant Steps for the first time and get goosebumps off of it. Could feel this is a beautiful thing. It is not abstruse nuclear physics.
I'll tell you another album that just means a lot to me is with Johnny Hartman.
Oh yeah. No,
it's insanely beautiful.
Yes. Autumn Serenade. Oh my God. Yep.
Lush Life for me, is so.
Lush Life, the song that Sinatra couldn't sing because the changes were too much for him.
Here's a question I have for you, because you've done this massively deep dive into Frank. How much do you think these players that we're talking about influenced Frank?
Frank was a Basie guy, Frank was a swing era guy. Basie harkened back to the swing era, and Basie's band was full of musicians that Sinatra loved, and he kept hiring all of them, including Basie, to accompany him. I'm positive that Frank did not own a copy of The State of Jazz to Come. I'm positive that Frank wasn't listening to A Love Supreme. That was no more to Frank's taste than most rock and roll was to Sinatra's taste. Sinatra had his loves, and he had his hidebound side, and he was born in 1915 after all, right? So he was just of a certain generation. I don't think there were many jazz musicians of that era, of that vintage, of the 19 teens, who were big fans of free jazz.
For me, so like in Kind of All Blues or Kind of Blue, there's this trio of geniuses that sparkle into this music. For Sinatra, Songs for Swinging Lovers for me is sort of like this pinnacle.
Mhm.
And it's a different kind of collaboration with Nelson Riddle and these insanely brilliant crafters of this American songbook. It's a different kind of collaboration, but it sparkles. And for me, that's his Everest.
I feel a lot the same way, although Frank did go on to do some latter work that I think is very beautiful. Summer Wind, That's
Mhm.
Life,
Yes.
the famous story of That's Life, where producer says to Sinatra, you know, and that was pretty good, Frank, about the take that Sinatra did, and purposefully, I'm pretty sure, because Frank gets furious, and the next take he does of That's Life is furious, and it's great. So he knew how to. I'm not saying Something Stupid was a great piece of music, but and I'm not saying that Frank's version of George Harrison's Something was a great piece of music, but he Sinatra could make some advances. Yeah, I agree with you about Songs for Swinging Lovers. Great, 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 and genius, genius, genius. But again, it's I don't know. I mean, there are so many houses in the mansion of music, and why can't this house over here be just as great as that house over there, right? Why can't
Right.
why can't we love Stevie Winwood and love Frank Sinatra? Why can't we love the incredible string band and also love Mingus and Fables of Faubus? You know, it's just you just make a slight adjustment and move on to the next genre. That's all.
Right. And also, like, I'm sure you deal with this, is like comparing like this album versus that album, or your this book versus that book, or in my case, this screenplay versus that screenplay. They're both different. They're not there to compete with each other, but very often people go, I really like this one as opposed to that one. And I was like, well, come on, they're both whatever.
That reminds me of the Jewish mother joke, right? She buys her boy chick two new shirts, and he comes down very proudly in the morning wearing one of his shirts, and she says, "What? You didn't like the other one?"
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you're there in the wilds of Westchester County,
Yes.
where I was born and my family
Ah,
comes from.
ah.
Born in New Rochelle.
And when did you when did you get to the valley? When did you get to the West Coast?
So most of my relatives are now in Valhalla, Westchester County, under about 3 feet of sod. But
Why they call it Valhalla?
yeah, they're all there. But so my family, my father and mother meet in New Rochelle, and they're so my
Your father's father was Ben Kalmanson.
my father's father is Ben Kalmanson, who was important at Warner Brothers beginning from the 20s as a distribution, ends up running distribution in the 50s. Into the 60s he becomes president, and kind of oversees this first permutation of these sales of out of the Warner Brothers family. It's where it's going right now is another podcast. But yeah, and then we move out to Las Vegas, no, Tucson, and then Las Vegas. I'm like a 2-year-old. My dad's in the radio station business, which he still is. 94, still going there. And then here we moved to LA in the early 60s, and the Valley, and in my Spanish radio, Iranian radio, like radio stations, is the Kalmanson, my father and my brother. What can I say? I'm an actor, comedian, podcaster, screenwriter, director. I spread my rejection around. I don't keep it in one place. That's my MO. So where are you in Westchester? You must be somewhere.
I am in a little hamlet known as Hastings on Hudson, uh,
Okay.
just north of Ella's hometown, Yonkers, just south of Dobbs Ferry, which gets name checked in the Dick Van Dyke Show. And Hastings on Hudson's it's a tiny little river town. It's right on the Hudson, and
Mhm.
It's hilly and it's great for walking. And this is where we wound up. This is where we
Cool.
brought up our boys.
Well, James, really appreciate this chat. I've been looking forward to it, and to the multitudes of listeners and followers and subscribers and friends. Check out Three Shades of Blue, this lost empire of cool. It is worth your while. And once you get past that, you can do a deep dive into James's, bibliography, which includes tennis great John McEnroe, which we another bad boy of his time. Jerry Lewis. I'll tell you a joke, because I used to hang out after my friendship with Milton after I moved back to LA. We're all sitting there at the Friars. You go, Billy, come on over. It's Milton on the wire. And okay. So I drive to the Friars Club and I go and I sit there. I'm the young guy. And Jerry, I wish I could tell you what year, because I don't, but he'd had a massive heart attack or a big coronary event. And he was getting out. And they go, what happened? What happened to Jerry? And they said, they found a cure for muscular dystrophy. That was the joke at the Friars Club table.
As comedians, because you're one, but when the highest compliment the comedian will give another comedian is with a straight face, you say, that's funny.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I laughed, and I never really quite felt that much warmth from those guys about Jerry. I think Jerry was a mixed bag, but
Jerry was a very mixed bag. Jerry was a titanic ego. He didn't have room for anybody who was going to begin to compete with him. He suffered fools very poorly, and to him, most of the world was fools. He was certainly not politically correct, certainly not when it came to women. He's been canceled, and he didn't live to tell the tale. And he was an arrogant guy, and I think that the work that he did in Scorsese's King of Comedy was just so brilliant, because the very grim, tough, egomaniacal man you see on the screen is Jerry Lewis. That's who Jerry was.
I was thinking about that in some ways that the character Langford, what was his, Jerry Langford?
Jerry Langford.
Yeah, and Rupert Pupkin, one of the greatest movie names of all time, Rupert Pupkin.
Everybody kept saying Pumpkin, yeah.
Yeah. That Jerry Langford was an reincarnation of Buddy Love.
Yes. Yeah.
The slick guy from
although
the Nutty Professor.
I would say that Buddy Love was more like Jerry's wannabe imitation of Dean. It was the ultimate cool guy. No, I think that Jerry Langford of King of Comedy, the role that Jerry Lewis was playing in King of Comedy, I think that was really that's the wizard behind the screen that really any of those late night guys is in real life, right? That is a tough spot. And you got to be tough as nails to hold it down. Johnny Carson was no saint, and he was no sweetheart. And Jerry was doing a brilliant job of not only playing himself, but showing what that territory is like.
Yeah, that is a sensational movie. And one thing in Hollywood is that people can sense desperation, like your neediness, and I call that the Pupkin meter, because if they sense he's fucking insane, get him out of here. he's redlining on his Pupkin meter. What price fame, what price glory, I think, is at the core of a lot of those people's lives. I watching Jerry's movie just because I was watching it last night with him and Milton in The Bellboy. They're just mugging. I mean, frankly, it's awful, the acting. And I know he thinks he's Chaplin, he's like doing these physical bits, and he's, but for me, sadly, it feels flat. I think my favorite of all those movies is That's My Boy, which was
I haven't watched it in a long time.
Yeah, me neither. It was like a football story, and Dean Martin is, a frat star, and but gee whiz, James, I really have enjoyed the
Well, to be
chat.
continued, Bill. We
What's
don't have
that?
to be continued. We can talk on another episode, or we
I
can
would love that. Yeah, I
talk
would love.
there
I would love that.
and we can go to Arts or wherever you like to get a pastrami sandwich.
Arts. Okay. Well, okay. Here, we've had COVID has not only killed many people, but it also has ruined or forced the closure of some of the most important delis. Greenblatt's my favorite, but we still have Brent's, we still have Nate Niles, and we still have the aforementioned. So I would love that. And I want to just remind folks, check out this new book. It'll take you there. And it's also like a guide into the music itself. You can, I want to listen to this album. I bought some of the Bill Evans records that I didn't really have. The Scott LaFaro, that incarnation of music. So it's a very good guide into the music to appreciate probably one of the greatest contributions of the American 20th century, these mid-century geniuses. Long after this edifice of the United States is forgotten, I'm betting that this music will still survive. So you've helped memorialize that in a deep way.
Thank you. That's high praise. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So folks, namaste, shalom, and aloha. By that I mean namashiloha. Till next time, see ya.